I don't think we necessarily thought that they were going to go after the civilian targets in all these GCC states. Yes, the military targets, like Al Udeid, for example, in Qatar, where U.S. military is present, but to fly Shahed drones directly into hotels and apartment buildings in Doha and Dubai, I think was a strategic mistake, quite frankly, because most of our partners were on the sidelines. They wanted to see diplomacy work, and they certainly didn't want to be involved. But now they are involved, and there's some indication that they may become more militarily involved directly against Iran.
Listening to that was Mick Mulroy, former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Hi there, Mick.
Hi, Ollie. Good to be with you.
Good to have you on. What do you make of what we were just saying there, whether or not Israel and also the US would be surprised by this reaction from Iran? Of course there'd be blowback. Of course they'd fight to try and retain what they have. But a hotel in Dubai, do you think that was expected?
So I would agree. I mean, this is an existential threat to them by definition, right? They took out 49, they being the United States and Israel, 49 senior leaders, decapitation strike almost immediately. Obviously, incredible work by the intelligence services, Mossad, CIA, and those that executed it. But I don't think we necessarily thought that they were going to go after the civilian targets in all these GCC states. Yes, the military targets, like Al Udeid, for example, in Qatar, where U.S. military is present, but to fly Shahed drones directly into hotels and apartment buildings in Doha and Dubai, I think was a strategic mistake, quite frankly, because most of our partners were on the sidelines. They wanted to see diplomacy work, and they certainly didn't want to be involved. But now they are involved, and there's some indication that they may become more militarily involved directly against Iran.
Yes, that's interesting. Do you feel like the Emiratis, for example, have gone from being on the sidelines, perhaps being on the sidelines with some sympathy towards Iran, to actually now really being quite annoyed with Iran for having hit them?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, they had now, of course, they had already joined the Abraham Accords. They had already, essentially became a partner to Israel, but they were essentially on the sidelines, and now they're firmly not. I mean, they have taken so many, and not just the ones that actually hit. If you look at the enormity of the amount of missiles and drones that were shot at UAE, only a fraction got through. So this is clearly an indication to them that they don't get a chance to stay on the sidelines, that they're going to be actively involved. Again, I think it was a strategic mistake of Iran, and I don't think they could necessarily undo it, because the decapitation strike was so significant that there wasn't much left of the chain of command to change courses, etc. I think they went on commander's intent, and then most of those commanders were killed.
Chuck Freilich there was just outlining the threat that Iran posed to Israel, which of course is sort of difficult to argue with. What was the threat, or what is the threat in your view, that Iran posed or poses now to the USA?
Well, Ali, that's a big question right now. So the imminent threat is being talked about quite a bit in Washington, because that's what gives the president, the commander in chief, the authority to act without congressional approval. Under the War Power Act, it specifically says that 60 days in, Congress is supposed to approve it going forward or not. But that gives the president a long leeway. And so we have heard several different descriptions of imminent threat. We heard that Iran was building a ICBM, so an intercontinental ballistic missile, but it turns out that the intelligence community assessed that's not anywhere close to happening. 9 years is what they estimate, so not imminent. Then we heard that they were about to attack U.S. positions in the Middle East, but the intelligence community briefed Congress today, and they said not accurate. So now we're at the point where, because we knew Israel was going to attack Iran, that's their choice, they're a sovereign nation, then Iran would likely respond not just to Israel, but also to the United States. So we're using that as the imminent threat that required us, if you will, to do preemptive strikes. That's going to be challenged, of course, by Congress, but ultimately that is what the administration has landed on after the first two essentially did not hold water.
And just in minute, if you can, what do you make of Trump's stated strategy that the Iranian people should rise up and take the opportunity? That's difficult, isn't it? Some of them aren't armed and they're against an army that are trained on them.
Absolutely correct. Obviously, mitigating the nuclear threat, mitigating the ballistic missile threat, I think are very clear objectives and the right objectives. And also, of course, the Navy, which we have done serious damage today. About 11 ships have been sunk, according to Central Command. But the idea of the population rising up against the regime is a hard one to see happening. There is no Second Amendment, if you will, like there is in the United States, meaning that the population is completely unarmed. So they would have to go up against both the Iranian military and the IRGC, which has all the power, all the essentially the arms, and has a capacity to severely, as we've already seen, quell a protest. So I think the U.S. should be somewhat tamed. Obviously, we'd like to see the regime change, but to call for them to go out in the street, we might see the fatality rates go from 30,000 to 300,000, because it's clear the regime is not going to hold back on anything when it comes to suppressing any kind of takeover internally to Iran.
Yes, well, let's hope not, but I recognize the analysis you're giving us there. Mick, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Ollie. Good to be with you.
Mick Mulroy there, former US Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East.
The Iranian Red Crescent says 555 Iranians have been killed so far in the airstrikes, and about also 115 of them were killed in one strike that hit a school in Minab. So far, 11 Israelis have been killed in retaliatory strikes from Iran.
Well, let's get an update now on where everything is this morning from Iranian-American journalist Suzanne Kianpour, who's co-host of the Global Power Shifts podcast. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. You have sources in Iran on the ground. What do you understand about the situation there at the moment?
Well, so for starters, it's been a crucial 24 hours here in Washington. As you're saying, they're trying to sell the war. And so for the first time, administration officials have spoken about how they see the campaign playing out. And President Trump said, "I won't get bored," meaning he's prepared to stick out the campaign for multiple weeks. The U.S. is yet to fully explain and answer questions around deaths of servicemen killed in Kuwait, and also about disputed reports of an attack which hit a girls' school in Iran. So what's interesting is on this particular story in Iran, there are people inside Iran who are saying that the IRGC themselves are responsible, but obviously at the same time, there are people who believe that the Israelis and the Americans are responsible. So there is a lot of mixed feelings on the ground about what's happening. Most people are happy that the supreme leader is dead. I mean, it's not like there's new supporters of the regime because of this strike. I would dispute that. That being said, we're still waiting to see if people are really going to go out in the streets, or more like, when are people going to go out in the streets? There are reports coming out that are unconfirmed as of now that there may be efforts to bust out political prisoners from Evin prison. I think if and when that happens, that will be a major turning point.
And who is leading that action? I mean, there is a great piece in the Times this morning about the different opposition groups within Iran, but is there somebody is coalescing around?
Is in terms of actual opposition leaders, no, there is not a one single leader inside Iran that people are coalescing around. Obviously, there are names that are known more than others. Nargis Mohammadi is one of them. She's a Nobel laureate. She was arrested a few weeks ago and thrown in Evin prison and slapped with another 7-year sentence. So clearly they were worried about her, but that has been kind of part of the problem. But interesting enough, when I've spoken to people on the ground kind of saying, look, I feel like we're at A and everyone's expecting to be at C, where is B? They push back and say, you're kind of thinking as somebody who's sitting outside and not recognizing the temperature on the ground. Once the people on the ground know and feel confident that the Americans and the Israelis have taken warehouses full of munitions and kind of significantly weaken the leadership, they anticipate people pouring into the streets and just taking care of them with their bare hands. Of course, Persians are known for hyperbole. So I think this is one of those situations where we kind of just have to wait and see what happens and what they truly do, because it's a bit late to arm them.
Yes, well, quite. I mean, you mentioned at the beginning there that we're hearing now from American politicians their sell, if you like, for what they're doing. And there have been a number of different motivations and justifications given for this action against Iran. What do you make of Marco Rubio's comments? I read some of them out there. We heard a little bit from him, suggesting that America's hand was forced by Israel, that Israel was about to take decisive action. And really, America was kind of secondary to that.
I mean, I think it doesn't actually do them any favors, to be frank. And what's really been striking as somebody who has been kind of covering Washington and war zones, shuttling between the two for the last nearly 15 years, this is one of those moments where normally we would have had a press conference with Donald Trump himself by now, President Trump himself. Instead, we had a press conference at the Pentagon with the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth. But the Pentagon press corps has been massively rejigged, so to speak. And the people that are prioritized are sympathetic influencers. It's not the national security correspondents and Pentagon press corps, people who have decades of experience. It's people who are sympathetic to their line. And so, the girls' school question didn't even come up in the Pentagon press briefing. It did on Capitol Hill because the nature of the Capitol Hill press corps, which I was a part of, you doorstep senators, they don't have any control. You ask them whatever question you want. That also applies to any principals that show up on the Hill, whether that's the CIA director, secretaries, cabinet members, etc. And so, Marco Rubio was forced to answer these questions, including motivations, as well as the girls' school, which again, he deflected to the Secretary of War and saying like they're investigating it. And so we also we had the Sunday shows yesterday. Normally cabinet members would be at least going on the Sunday shows and kind of making their case to the American public. We didn't have that. And so I think in this moment, the what's happened with the press, the free press, is really glaringly obvious. And also, it's been incredibly difficult to actually get information on the ground in the region out of Iran, especially because, tons of journalists who have been longtime foreign correspondents have just been laid off from the likes of Washington Post.
Yeah. Suzanne, can I ask you briefly before you go, do you think Marco Rubio is in a bit of trouble here?
Is he in a bit of trouble here in the sense that do you think he misspoke?
Yes, or will he have? I guess for the Trump administration, this isn't exactly helpful.
Yeah, listen, I think there's an interesting walk back, seemingly, both from Hegseth and Rubio about motivations. President Trump said his goal was regime change, and now was the time for the people to rise up, and it's a once in a generation moment to take back their country, which he's not wrong about. And yet that we saw from Hegseth and Rubio was seemingly not that. And so it's interesting to kind of watch this play out in public. Those of us who are watching this closely are kind of thinking, are they trying to convince President Trump otherwise because they don't necessarily feel confident that regime change will happen as quickly, which of course it wasn't going to happen quickly. But I mean, it's key to remember rather that President Trump said he's not going to get bored, and he's also, I doubt, going to walk back his motivations for going for this.
Suzanne, thank you so much for giving us your time this morning. Great to get your perspective. That is Iranian-American journalist Suzanne Kiampo.